Well, hello. So, hey peeps, Thursday night video. I have to apologize about last Thursday night. I had like all this time on my hand on Wednesday night. I was like, why is that? That's crazy. And then I got it the next day and realized it wasn't Wednesday night, it was Thursday night, and I completely forgot to do the video. So apologies. So tonight's live video, you'll notice the absence of a sewing machine. We're going to talk about binding, and I'm going to do it in 3 smaller videos to cover off. Tonight will be how to measure, work out how much fabric you need for your binding, and how much to buy, which is important. The second one will be how to cut your binding and sew your binding onto your quilt. And the third one will be how to finish your binding and join the edges and then finish off by hand. So over the next 3 weeks, as long as I remember to come. So what you will need for tonight's video is you will need a tape measure, and you will need a small little seam guide. If you don't have one of those, it's not the end of the world, but it's quite handy for demonstrations tonight. And fabric. That's it. So let's talk about binding on a quilt. What is binding on a quilt, I hear you think? So binding is, I really should have prepped myself a bit better here, but binding is this folded over fabric edge here that hides the raw edge of your finished quilting project. So it covers this edge up, and it gives, well, to be honest, sometimes it makes all the difference to how a quilt looks, how that binding, the color choice that you make for your binding. So it's an important part of a quilt, both in the function of binding and the colors that you choose. It's not always just used for a quilt though. Cheryl does a lot of projects where she uses binding to, there's a pin in it, I just pricked myself. One of those dumb long pins too. Cheryl quite often does a lot of projects that have binding to finish off the edges. This really popular project of Cheryl, she's done so many classes of this bob and caddy here. You can see here getting that binding around the edges gives us a nice neat finish, but also the color really pops out. Hello Joanne, how you going? So often binding is used for other projects as well, where you have a raw edge that's hard to get rid of any other way. I also like to use binding for something to give me a neat edge inside without having to have some sort of finish around the outside. So this bag here has got binding around the outside. So essentially these layers of fabric put together and then stitched down, and the binding holds them all together. So it's one of those things that's a crucial part of any sort of project that you make using patchworking techniques. Cool? Binding. Now, not to be mistaken with bias binding. Bias binding is cut on the diagonal so it can do curvy stuff. Normal binding is usually cut across the fabric, unless you're doing a quilt that is curvy, in which case you'll have to cut it at 45 degrees to give the stretch of the bias. But the big thing about binding that's different from bias binding, as you'll see tonight, is the actual way that it's cut, folded, and put on. So it's completely different, really. All right, so let's get started. I will just say that sometimes you can do quilting projects where you don't have to do binding at all. I think in America they call it bagging. So essentially what happens is, this is a little project that Louise has got coming up as a class actually, where the project itself is made with the backing fabric put over the front of the fabric, then it's stitched down and turned inside out and then top stitched. So you don't need binding around the edge because you have a nice neat edge. Here's another example of it here. And I think Louise has a class coming up on this one too. So, stay tuned. But you can see here, no binding. And it suits this kind of quilt because you don't want the frame of binding around the outside. Depends on what you're doing. Horses for courses. All right, so let's not procrastinate. Well, procrastinate. I always procrastinate. Let's not dally. Let's talk turkey. Let's work out how much material we need to buy to bind a quilt. So essentially, here is our quilt. It's actually a little free motion test sew I did today, but we're going to pretend it's our quilt. And we're going to use blank paper so I can tell you how to work out how much fabric you need. Now, for starters, most of you know, but we'll assume that some people don't, that patchworking fabric is different to normal dressmaking fabric. It's 100% cotton. It's percale. It's usually, it should be percale. Unfortunately, some department stores sell it and it's not percale anymore. It's a little bit open weave. But essentially, it's bright colors, 100% cotton. And when you buy it, it typically is on a bolt like this. So it's sold on a rectangular bolt instead of a roll. And this bolt from here to here is doubled over. See, there's a little fold there. So essentially, most of your patchwork fabrics across here are, let's say, 42 inches. And you'll find in patchworking, we talk a lot about inches because Americans pretty much lead the patchworking market, and there's a lot of American patchworkers. So we all have to work in inches. If I refer to inches and you don't know what that means, yeah, there's formulas you can work out, do the maths for it. But essentially, if I tell you that something is 4 inches big, find 4 inches on your tape measure and then just fold it over, and that's how many centimeters is. 4 inches is 10 centimeters, 1 inch, 2.5, half an inch, 12 millimeters. So easiest way to do the maths. But tonight we're going to work in inches. So let's look at this guy here. This is our quilt. Imagine it much bigger, but the rules are the same. What we need is we need the measurement from here, 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 and here. And typically, this measurement and this measurement is the same, and this measurement and this measurement is the same. Or, for those of you who are really fanatic quilters, you might chip me on that it isn't always the case, but for most purposes it is. But either way, you can either do this and add it together, or you can add 1, 2, 3, and 4. But anyways, that's the basic length that we want to work with. So we are going to go ahead, and we're going to measure around our quilt. So I just pressed his nose and my tape measure just got sucked up. Okay, so we're going to go here. So 9 inches. And then let's turn it. Plus, and there's nothing wrong with just doing the maths on your tape measure as you go. 9 inches plus 14 inches. Oh, plus 14 inches. 9 inches, and now it's 14 inches. So the whole distance from here to here is 14 inches. And we're going to write that down. And because we're going all the way around, we want to double it. So 14 plus 14, so that's 28 inches. The circumference of this little quilt is 28 inches all the way around. So great. Step 1, we know the length of the binding we need, but how does that help us work out how much material to buy? Essentially, your binding fabric, when you cut your binding, you cut it 2.5 inches wide. Now, it's not always 2.5 inches, but it almost always is. I'll explain to you why. When you first put your binding on, you're going to stitch it down here with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So then when we fold that back over, we are going to cover that 1/4 again. So we're going to add another 1/4. And then we do the same thing here. We fold it over this little fat bit of the quilt. So that's a 1/4. And then we're going to go over here and stitch it down, and that's another 1/4. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters, which is going to be 1 inch. But we need to double it because it's folded on, this fabric is on the fold. So that's 2 inches, and we do 1/2 inch for good measure. Cool? So 2.5 inches is the typical width that you will cut your binding fabric. And next week, I'm going to show you how to cut it. I'm showing you how to piece it to get the length that you need. So 2.5 inches wide is the fabric we need to cut for our binding. So now we know the maths. We know that we need 28 inches in length, and we know we need it to be 2.5 inches wide. What do we do next? So this is our fabric that we're going to be cutting, and we're going to cut our binding. Oh, is there a bit of a shadow there? Or maybe it's just my phone reflecting. We're going to cut the binding across the width of the bolt of fabric. So from the selvage and across on the fold. So that is, the fold is here, and we're going to cut lengthways here. So this piece of fabric here across, as we said before, is a total of 42 inches long. Now, I haven't thought about this very well because we can get this out of here, right? So we're going to imagine that this quilt is huge and it's much bigger than 28 inches. We're going to imagine that's 196 inches around. Oh, Molly, Penny is silly goose. All right, so the quilt's going to be 100 for hot. This, you're looking at 196 inches around here from a distance. So pretend you're a long way away. Chuck that over there. Okay, so now we're going to pretend the circumference of our quilt is 196 inches. What a goose. I can't believe I didn't think that through properly. So writing that down again, 196 inches is the outside of our quilt, like so. And we want 2.5 inches wide for our binding. Oh, that traffic is terrible out there again. And we know that our fabric here is 42 inches across. The fabric is 42 inches. So I'm going to try and explain this to you with my bit of paper. This is a total of 196 all the way around, but the longest strip of continuous fabric we can cut is 42 inches. So that means that we need to cut a piece of fabric 42 inches long and 2.5 inches wide. Cool? And we need to see how many of these 42-inch long bits of fabric we then stitch together to make one long piece of binding to go around the outside of our quilt. So the formula is the circumference of the quilt, let's see, is divided by how many times this 42-inch piece will go into it. So if I get my calculator, did I get a calculator? It's here, I promise. Oh no. Oh no, it's over here. Here, look at this picture for a second. Hang on, I'll get my calculator. Alrighty. So, just to start again, the circumference of the quilt, we need to know how many pieces of these bits of fabric we need to stitch together to go around the circumference of the quilt. So that is, this fabric is 42 inches long. The circumference divided by 42 will tell us how many 42-inch strips will go around. So, high action. You're going to get to see my calculator live. Hang on, I'll see if I can do it. How do I say boobies? No, I won't do that. I'll just do this. 196 divided by 42 inches equals 4.66666666666666. That's how many times you need to stitch these 42-inch long strips of fabric together to get around the circumference of that quilt for the binding. So 4.666, you could argue that that's a number. My son, who's a mathematician, he will argue that's a number. But to us patchworkers, 4.66666 is close enough to 5. Because, you know, if you've got a bit of fabric spare, then that's groovy. So you need 5 of these little guys joined together end to end to go around the quilt. Now, the thing is, you don't just join them end to end. There's a special joining technique that we'll talk about next time, which uses up a little bit of extra fabric. So what I always do is I get this number here, and then I just add 1. So it was 5, but I've added 1 for good measure. Cool? So that means we need 6 strips. So we're nearly there. 6 strips around the outside. Groovy. So 6 strips, and each strip is 2.5 inches wide. So each cut that we make of our fabric will be 2.5 inches to piece together to make our binding. And we now know that we need 6 strips, 2.5 inches wide to do it. So the maths on that one is 6 times 2.5. And let's find out what that is. 6 times 2.5 is 15. 15 what? It's 6 times 2.5 inches. So the answer is 15 inches of fabric. You need to buy 15 inches of fabric to cut up enough binding to go around the outside of your 196 inches quilt. Cool? So what is 15 inches? If you get your tape measure out and find 15 inches on your tape measure, if we flip it, do you know how much it is? Whoosh! It is 38 centimeters, which is close to 40 centimeters. And we all know that if we're buying fabric and it's 40 centimeters is what we need, we're super shooming that up to 50 centimeters. So you need to get 40 centimeters for sure, but to be safe, we're going to round it up to 50. So that's how you work out how much fabric you need to go around your quilt for your binding. So I know this one seems a little quick tonight, but I want to try and sneak down the time of my videos a little bit and do a couple more repeats rather than trying to squish them all up into one. So tonight, that's how you go about calculating your binding fabric and working out how much you need to buy. So just recapping, circumference of the quilt is 196. We have 42-inch wide strips. We need to work out how many strips go around. Then we multiply that number by the width of the strip, and that's how much we need to buy. Now, the thing is that sometimes your fabric isn't 42 inches wide. Sometimes you might have a fat quarter, for example, in which case it's 20 inches wide. So you need to know if you can get that out of your fat quarter. So we do the same maths again. So we're going to clean a bit of paper. Here, instead of, oh, sorry, dudes. Instead of doing 196 divided by 42 inches, we're now going to do 196 divided by this number here, 20 inches. Oh, sorry, almost cut you guys out of the action. 196 divided by 20, and that is, you're going to need 9.8 strips, which rounds up to 10 strips. So we need 10 strips at 2.5 inches per strip. So that means that if your fabric was 20 inches wide, you would need 10. So you will need 10 of 2.5. So what's that? Just I'm thinking one thing ahead here. 10 by 2.5 inches. That is 25 strips. Cool? Cool. Alrighty, so I am, but forming the number 4 is not so good. Sorry, this is a teaching me. Oh, are you picking on the way I draw my number 4? Is that what you're doing, Joanne? Alrighty, so I hope you guys got all that. I just want to cover off this last one again in case I made mistakes. Just hang on a second. 196 divided by 42 inches. Yep, is now 196 divided by 20 inches. Whoop. Is 9.8, so that's 10, and 10 times 2.5 is 25 inches, and 25 inches, 25 inches means we need to get 65 centimeters of fabric. 65 centimeters of fabric, and we're going to round that up to 70. Cool? Cool. Alrighty, so thank you very much for watching tonight. I feel like I got the Goodwill hunting in me out of me. God, that's so funny. A couple of things just to finish up. Joanne, thank you very much for your big online order. There was a couple of things that were out of stock. I was hoping they'd come in today, but they won't, so I'll post it out to you. We're out of stock on the mesh, so I'm chucking another colour for free until the other stuff comes in stock. And also, too, Louise has chucked a class in. We're going to try and sneak some classes back in and see how people respond to them. So on Wednesday next week, Louise is going to do her Quandai style quilt, which is... I'm only here for a minute. How do I make such a big mess? Oh, this one. Sorry, guys. That's her quilt here. So this technique here is a Quandai style quilt, and it's all about having fun and just chucking all your bits and pieces on top and quilting over the top. So if you want to have a bit of fun, come along to that class next week. Give Louise a call to book the things on our Facebook page. I think that's it. I think I've done what I need to do today. Tune in next week at 7 p.m. and we're going to talk about how to cut the binding out of your fabric, and then we are going to show you how to press it and everything you need to do the next step. Alrighty peeps, if you like this, please give me a thumbs up. I see lots of loves there. Thank you so much. The more you interact with my videos, the more your friends see them, and then I can do more cool stuff. If I didn't have to sleep, I'd do even more videos, but, you know, we'll see how we go. So feedback is always welcome. Please let us know if there's anything you want me to do particularly, and I am gonna skedaddle. Alrighty peeps, catch you later. Bye.